Well, an old shepherd stood beside his flock of sheep deep in the Sinai desert. The granite peaks rose up on either side. The sheep were busy looking for stray blades of grass between the rocks. Little did he know, but he was not only about to meet God, he was also about to learn God's personal name. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught sight of what looked like a bush that was on fire. And we went over to check it out. God spoke to him from the flames. God commanded him to leave that desert, to return to Egypt, where he'd been born, and to go with the mission of bringing the Israelites out of slavery to a land flowing with milk and honey. The man, of course, was Moses. And in response, Moses asked a practical question. Exodus 3:13, we read, Moses speaking back to God, and he says, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you.' And they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" The obvious point here is that Moses didn't know God's name. He knew him as the God of our fathers. He knew him as a God. Remember, there were many, many gods in the cultures of that time. Egypt had a whole slew of gods, and so did the Assyrians and the Phoenicians and the Greeks and everybody. Everybody had gods, lots and lots of gods. But which one would be the God that was speaking to Moses? So he says, "I don't know your name." We read in verses 14 and 15 God's answer. "I am who I am." This is what you are to say to the Israelites. "I am has sent me to you." God also said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, 'The Lord,'" notice the capital letters, "'the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation." You see, God's name isn't God. We use the term God, the name God, as if it were sort of God's proper name or maybe his first name or whatever. But God's name isn't God. Just like your name isn't he or she or man or woman or boy or girl. Somebody says to you, "Hey, you, that man over there," you definitely know that the person who's talking to you doesn't know who you are because you have a name. And in the same way, what we learn here from Moses' dialogue with the Lord is that God's name isn't God. God is God, but he has a personal name, and that means he can enter into a personal relationship with you and me. His name, the original spelling of his name in the Hebrew Bible is YHWH, which is pronounced, the best we can guess, Yahweh. And it derives from the verb to be. That's why God describes himself to Moses as "I am. I am who I am." This same name is translated in your NIV Bible as the word Lord, all in capital letters. And the reason for that is that the ancient Jewish people would not say the name of God, the name Yahweh. They would not say it because they did not want to in any way take away from its sacredness. And so instead, whenever they saw the name of God in the Bible, the name Lord in the Bible, or Yahweh, they said Lord. And that way, people knew they were talking about the one whose name they did not dare say. And so our English Bibles sort of capture that same idea by giving the personal name of God in capital letters, L-O-R-D. Every time you see that in your Old Testament, you are seeing the sacred name of God. That's how it's represented. And it's this God, no other, who made a solemn treaty or covenant with Abraham. He promised to make him the father of many nations. It was this God, Yahweh, the Lord, who reaffirmed that covenant with each generation. A covenant was this solemn treaty in which the great Creator God reached down to little people like you and me, a little group of people, people that were not considered consequential in any way, shape, or form. They began as slaves in Egypt, and then they came in as vagabonds and marauders into the promised land, and only gradually settled down and became a nation. And he said, "I'm making a treaty with you. I'm going to be in an eternal relationship with you." You see, that can happen if God's a person. That can happen if God has a name and we can know his name. The most sacred relationship in my life is my marriage. And it was a long time ago that I went to church, like on a Sunday morning like this, in I think it was mid-January, and I saw a beautiful, beautiful young woman sitting in church. Went home I happened to be fortunate enough to live with the pastor and his wife, and the pastor's wife knew everybody in the church. And so I very casually at lunchtime said, "Oh, by the way, that couple over there, do you know who?" "Oh, they're not a couple," she said. I went, "Oh. Well, would you happen to know what her name is?" And Mrs. Moreland said, "Oh, her name is Suzanne." And this bomb went off in the back of my head that said, that name is going to be the most important name for the rest of your earthly life. I never thought it would be Suzanne. But all of a sudden, now, possibility of a relationship, obviously, it took a few months for us to get on first name basis and begin to dream of sharing a life together. But you can't have that relationship without a name. And when God gives his name to us, he's saying, I'm not just giving you my name so that you can sort of write it down somewhere or you can file it away in names of gods I have known. He says, I am inviting you into a personal relationship. A God with a personal name. Now, when we come to Isaiah, you remember he commanded Israel to go out into that desert experience. Here they were devastated. Their city was in ruins. And he said, go out and build a highway for your God. Well, who is this God? We discovered that this God is none other than the same creator who was out in the desert for a devastated Moses at a time when the people were likewise in slavery and in bondage. When the road was built, the glory of the Lord would be revealed to the whole world. The glory of the Lord was revealed when Moses came and brought Israel out to the promised land. And now God's saying, I'm going to do it again. Isaiah says to Jerusalem, after he has told them in verse 9, here is your God, chapter 40, verse 10, then tells us who this God is. He says, see, the sovereign Lord comes with power. Lord, capitals, L-O-R-D. It's this God, the Lord, Yahweh, and none other that's coming once again to his people. Exile meant being estranged from the Lord. The relationship was broken. It was not working. But the exile's over. Once again, Jerusalem's going to welcome her God. Now let's go to David's psalm in Psalm 24, and you see what Isaiah was saying was going to come to pass. Verse 7 says, lift up your head, you gates, be lifted up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. And here's the question. Who is this King of glory? And the answer, same answer, the Lord, Yahweh, strong and mighty, the Lord, mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, you gates, lift them up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. It means the King of Jerusalem and the King of the world coming into that fellowship with his people. Question again, who is he, this King of glory? And there's only one answer. The Lord, Yahweh Almighty, he is the King of glory. Do you ever have to dial 911? Anybody ever have to dial 911? Yeah. If you have, maybe you saw an accident on the side of the road, and I know sometimes now with cell phones, if you're not driving, the other party can dial and report something, but maybe you pulled over and tried to help, and you've looked around and you're the first person with a phone. I remember way, way, way back when I was a night watchman, long before cell phones, but there's nothing to do when you're a night watchman except just look at the dark. And if anything unusual happens, it kind of gets your attention. And I remember on 2 occasions, I saw smoke and fire down on the waterfront. And both times I got to run in and call the fire department. That's got to be, when you're a kid, that's like, wow. And then after I called them and made my breathless report, what did I do? I went out and I just stood there to watch the show happen. And when I heard the sirens up on the top of the hill, I knew I called them. And then the trucks come roaring in, and people are running around, and hoses and fire trucks and police, and people are coming out of buildings, and I'm standing there going, I did that. It's pretty cool. And of course, nobody got hurt. But you know that feeling. There's chaos. There's panic. There's an emergency taking place, and you don't have what it takes to fix it. I mean, this was not something, in one of these cases, the refrigerator unit on a truck was burning. And I mean, that whole truck was going to go. And I'm not going near that truck. This is not my deal. This is way over my pay grade. So I made the call, and I waited to see help come. And the minutes, they kind of seemed like hours, and you're waiting until you hear the siren and you begin to see help arrive. That's what we want to see when we're in a crisis situation. We want to see strength. We want to see someone come who can handle the situation. And Isaiah tells destitute and powerless Jerusalem that their 911 call has made it through. Help is on the way. He says, if we read all of verse 10, see, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and he rules with a mighty arm. See, his reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. This God of yours, the Yahweh, the creator of the world, when he shows up, he's in control. It doesn't matter what problem you're facing. It doesn't matter how much chaos is around you. It doesn't matter how unjust the world might be. It doesn't matter how faithless the world might be. When the Creator shows up, reality is on the block. And all the power of the Creator God, a God who could create galaxies and is by a thought, is there for you. The Lord, you see, Isaiah says, is not only coming, he's coming in power and might. He's coming to bring order to the chaos and the confusion. He's coming to make things right. He's coming as the God of the ancient covenant to fulfill his promise to protect his people. When he comes, he's on your side because he knows you and he loves you. Isaiah says he comes with his reward and his recompense. Well, these are terms that could also be translated booty and tribute. He comes, he's the conquering king who has stripped the enemy army of all of its goods, the spoils of war. Israel knew what that felt like. It had been stripped of wealth and glory by the conquering Babylonians. It's all detailed in the story of the fall of Jerusalem, how all of the gold and silver objects in the temple were taken off to Babylon to be used in the worship of Babylon's god. They were completely desecrated. Well, now, Isaiah says the Lord's coming back. Now, he's not just going to bring silver and gold objects with him, although many of those were returned, but he's going to come with the spoils of a spiritual battle. He has captured the enemy's stronghold. As one Old Testament passage puts it, he leads captivity captive. And so you think about that in our situation. You think about the things that haunt us and the things that have power over us, things that we can't see, spiritual things that we can't even imagine, things that may go back for generations in our families. And we look at those and we are powerless before them. When the Lord comes, those things are chained in his wake. They have nothing for him. You see, when God comes, it's a brand new day. And you and I need to understand that we will be, maybe right now are in situations where he needs to come. It's not enough just to say, well, I just believe God's everywhere at all times. Yeah, that's true. But what about in your situation? Is his power and his might and his strength and his healing and his justice present in your current situation? If not, you build a road for him and invite him to come in. There is a real sense in which God isn't present by virtue of whatever we have done or those have done around us, and that he comes and he becomes present in a brand new way. Like Jerusalem, we're called to make a highway for God in the desert. You see, God has entered into a new covenant. Just like he entered into that first covenant with Abraham and so on, he's entered into what Jesus calls the new covenant. Remember, we received the Lord's table, the bread and the cup, and we quote the words of Jesus, this is the new covenant in my blood, which was shed for you. It's a renewing of that ancient covenant. And in that covenant, you see now that great God, the God of their fathers, becomes our Father, Yahweh, the Lord. In fact, the first Christians referred to Jesus as Lord. You may see that all through the New Testament, the Lord Jesus Christ. At one level, they were saying that Jesus, not Caesar, was their rightful ruler because Caesar demanded to be called Lord. But at a deeper level, as Jewish Christians, they knew what it meant to call Jesus Lord because they were calling him what the Old Testament called Yahweh. And they were saying, this is our Creator God present and among us in all of his power and all of his saving grace. So we build the road in the desert places of our lives and our world. And who is it that comes in all of his glory and power? It's the Lord Jesus, ruling with a mighty arm, mighty to save. So what does this mighty king look like, coming in power and ruling with a mighty arm? Well, it must have been somewhat of a surprise for Isaiah's readers, maybe not so much for us. Verse 11 says, and here comes the great mighty Yahweh. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. The shepherd had a long flowing robe, and he could take that robe and make a pouch over his chest. That's where he put the lambs. You can imagine them all cuddled up there, listening to the shepherd's heartbeat, keeping warm, being carried through a storm, through a dangerous place. The very beginning of this chapter, as Isaiah is beginning to talk to broken Jerusalem, the first word is comfort. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Well, here, this is what comfort looks like. Not a marauding, powerful king who strikes terror in everyone as he walks into town. Not God coming back saying, I told you so, I told you were such a problem and such a mess, and now I'm really going to punish you. But instead a shepherd. The Lord, Yahweh, for whom we build the highway in the desert, comes as a shepherd caring for his flock. The Lord, Yahweh, who will reveal his glory and his splendor to the entire earth, is gathering lambs in his arms. The Lord, Yahweh, whose breath withers the peoples of the earth like a scorching wind, withers the flowers of the field, gently leads the ewes and their nursing lambs. This is the vision of Yahweh that caused David to write his most famous psalm. Psalm 23, verse 4, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And remember how the psalm starts? Yahweh, the Lord, is my shepherd. So Isaiah is simply closing the loop here, isn't he? He's just saying, look, we've always known that our God is Yahweh, the Lord. And we've always known that he is mighty and powerful, but we've also always known that he's the shepherd who loves and cares for his flock. Yahweh is the shepherd king who comforts his people. He's the king who came in the person of Jesus, his son. It was Jesus that said in John chapter 10, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Verse 14, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. It was no accident that Jesus defined himself as shepherd. The very term shepherd referred to the king in his duty to care for his people. But for Israel, there was only one good shepherd. And it wouldn't be David or Solomon or some other earthly king. Because David said, Yahweh, the Lord, the God with a name, the God who makes a covenant with us and promises to be faithful to us and calls us to be faithful to him. He is our shepherd, I shall not want. He's the one who leads me beside still waters, makes me lie down in green pastures. He's the one who restores my soul. And even though my walk goes through the darkest part of that desert experience, he's the one that'll be present for me. To build a road in the desert for the Lord means, first of all, that you have to be willing to go out into the desert. You have to pick up your shovel and you have to pick up your tools and go out to that place that you don't want to face, that place you don't want to go. and say, I'm going to go in that place and open a path into my life for God. Even the great God of heaven, the Lord himself, will not violate your personal freedom and your personal will. I'm sure every one of us can think of times in our lives where we have refused to let God into a place because we thought we could handle it, or because we were too embarrassed or too ashamed or too afraid. And it's only been by God's grace that finally somebody or something got our attention and we were willing to say, okay, I'll get that help. We make the choice to build the road for the Lord. I'll tell you, if your desert is like the deserts that I face, that choice can be the most frightening thing you ever do, because it means you have to accept that there's a desert. You can no longer pretend that desert's going to just go away, or that you're suddenly going to become stronger than this problem. It's a hard thing. It's a scary thing. But the good news is that the king is out in the desert as your shepherd. And just as Moses went out into a vast wilderness thinking his life was done, his future was zero, his people were forever going to be captive in Egypt. It was right there that a bush exploded with fire and refused to burn. It was right there that the angel of the Lord appeared. It was right there that the voice of Yahweh himself came to Moses. And when Moses said, well, who are you? He said, I am the Lord. I am who I am. The Lord be my name forever, for all generations. Little did Moses know that a group of Jesus followers on some other continent, over 3,000 years later, would be saying, Moses, thanks for asking. Thanks for asking who he is. And thanks for following him and trusting him. And thanks for building a road in the desert. One back to Egypt and then one out of Egypt to the promised land. Because now, because of that road, one day a baby could be born in Bethlehem, who would go to Egypt and would come back, who would go to the edge of the desert to be baptized, who would go to a hill outside of Jerusalem, its own horrible desert place, and the shepherd would lay down his life for you, for me. So when the desert looks daunting, put it in perspective. And remember, it may look empty, but it's not. The Lord has promised that he's there. He's your shepherd king. When you're too weak to walk, he'll pick you up and fold you into that garment and carry you all the way home. Let's bow our heads together. I want to ask our prayer team to come down, and the band, you guys did a great job today. Please come on back up. And with your head bowed and your eyes closed, look, there are some of us here who just need some comfort and strength and a healing touch from God in the desert that we're walking right now. Or it may be on behalf of someone else. Now here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask that if you have a special need for prayer this morning, sometimes we ask you to come down front. You know, maybe that's just even more than you want to do. Some of you may want to come down. Others, I'm going to ask you to either stand where you are or raise your hand, okay? And we're all going to have our eyes open. We're all going to look around, and we're going to go find somebody to pray for. Now, you don't have to say any fancy words. You don't have to even say a word. But you may just feel drawn to a person that's going through a hard time, and you can just go over and put your hand on their shoulder as the band leads us in song. And perhaps someone in the circle will want to say just say a word of prayer on behalf of all of you, or you may all want to pray. We have a few moments here. What good is it to talk about building a road in the desert for Jesus and not even taking some time to take the first shovelfuls out of that desert and begin to prepare that path? So here's the deal. If you have a special need, I encourage you to come, or else, if not, would you raise your hand? If there's a special need. Well, you're all being stoic today. We got one hand down here. Who else do we have? Got one over here. Who else? Help me out. Over here. Yep. Yep, right there. Another one, right? Anybody else? Right over here, way over on the other side. Yep, I think I see your hand. Anybody else? This is not an admission of guilt or weakness in the sense that there's something wrong with us. This is an admission that God is bigger and greater. All right, anybody else? I don't want you to miss this time for prayer. Right down here at the front, Bill. All right, so let's stand together. Yep, someone else right here in the back. Okay, right back with Alane. Let's stand and go to those folks. Or else if you feel brave, folks, you who raise your hands, come on down to the front. It works either way. And if you don't come to us, we'll come to you. But let's just move around and find people to pray for. You may make a new friend in the process. And your prayer life will be deeper all this week because you're going to take that name home with you and say, I'm going to pray for you over these next days and weeks.